So welcome everyone to the audience as well, to Lolli's first In Conversation talk. Tonight is a celebration of The Employees, a novel which probes into what it means to be human emotionally and ontologically, while simultaneously delivering an overdue critique of a life governed by work. Tonight we are very lucky to have Olga Ravn discuss the novel with fellow writer and artist Yelena Moskovich, in a conversation touching upon the craft of writing, the fusion of visual and literary arts, and our balance of living and working. Translated by Martin Aitken, The Employees is the first of Olga's novels to appear in English, but her fiction and poetry has been received critical acclaim in Denmark for years. She is also an outspoken participant in public debates on social and cultural issues. Interviewing her this evening is Yelena, the distinctive author of The Natashas and Virtuoso. Her fiction likewise plays into form and narrative, presented through unique and surreal turns of phrase. She is currently teaching on the MA in Creative Writing at the University of Kent in Paris. So I'll pass it over to Yelena to start.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we find ourselves in space among the crew of 6,000 ship, both human and humanoid employees, after they have taken a number of strange objects on board from a new planet. A series of anonymous employee reports conducted to gauge the effect of these new objects on workplace productivity reveal an obsessive longing probing beneath the daily routines of humans and cyborgs alike. What is this shivering affection between organic and non-organic material? In a work described as powerful and philosophical, and as beautiful as it gets, beauty and longing in the infinite universe, The Employees is a rare and unforgettable experience. And it is my immense pleasure to welcome Olga Ravn. So thank you. I usually would have a lot of applause at this time, but I imagine this like 50 times over. So I think a really good place to start would be if you could give us a taste and read a part of the novel in Danish, and then I'll go ahead and I'll read that same part in English. So over to you.
Yes, I know it's always difficult to hear readings in a language you don't understand, but I don't know, you will probably get some of the music. Actually, this is also about music in some way. Vidneudsagn 159. Jeg drømmer, jeg er tilbage på jorden. Det er den sidste dag inden takeoff med det 6.000 skib. Alting står tydeligt frem som efter en stor sorg, hvor alle sanser er vagte. Der er himlen, der vælter ned med sit lys. Et blåt vand over skoven, som jeg går igennem på vej mod stationen. Der er hvert et blad på hvert et træ, og bladene vender og drejer sig som spejle i sommeren. Der er lugten fra skovens bund og den varme asfalt. Der er lyden af dyr og fugle. Lyden for biler nede ved krydset. Vinden over mit ansigt og lyden af den. Der er solen i min mund, når jeg åbner den op mod den store stjerne. Det er som om det hele går ind i mig og sprænger mig indefra, men det er en meget langsom eksplosion, som hvis jeg blev forvandlet til et stykke musik. Jeg har opdaget, at jeg for hver dag på skibet, for hvert lysår vi fjernede os fra planeten, for hvert fuldendt kredsløb om nyopdagelsen blev mere og mere popsang, at jeg er en gentagelse af det samme refræn. Jorden, jorden, hjem, hjem. Mit barn, hvor gammel er han nu? Og han skreg af glæde over togbroen. Jeg er ligeglad med konflikten. Fortæl mig, hvad jeg skal gøre, og så gør jeg det. Jeg kunne ikke, hvor meget jeg end forsøgte, etablere den samme form for liv her på skibet. Arbejdet var ikke nok for mig. Jeg har mistet mig selv. Hver dag er der et savn i mine hænder, efter at grave sig dybt ned i jord, efter at sænkes ned i en sikkerhed, der tager imod min død og forvandler den til sin egen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So now in English, statement 159. I dream that I'm back on Earth. It's the last day before going away on 6,000 ship. Everything stands out so clearly, the way it does in grief, when all senses are awakened. There's the sky pouring out its light, its blue water over the woods I walk through on my way to the station. There are the trees with all their leaves, the leaves that turn and spin like mirrors in the summer air. There's the smell of the soil and warm asphalt and the sound of animals and birds, the noise of the traffic at the junction, the breeze as it smooths my face and the sound it makes in my ears, the sun in my mouth as I gape up at the great star. It's as if everything passes into me and splits me open from inside, but it's a very slow rupture, and I feel as though I'm being transformed into a piece of music. I've discovered that with every passing day on board the ship, every light year that removed us from the planet, every completed orbit of new discovery, I've become increasingly like a pop song, the same looping refrain, earth, earth, home, home. My child, how old is he? How old is he now? He squealed with joy on the railway bridge. I don't care about the conflict. Tell me what I'm supposed to do and I'll do it. No matter how hard I tried, I was unable to find the same kind of life here on board the ship. The work wasn't enough for me. I've lost myself. Every day my hands yearn to dig deep into soil so that I might lower myself into its certainty and the earth receive my death and make me its own. Thank you. This is the English version. So I think a really good place to start would be at the origins of the novel, which took its inspiration from an exhibit by the Danish artist Lea Guldita Hesteland, if I pronounced it correctly. And the exhibit is called Consumed Future Spewed Out as Present at Overgaden in Copenhagen in 2018. For those of us who aren't familiar with Hesteland or the exhibit, I was wondering if you could talk about your experience of the visual space of this exhibit and how you went about translating it into the space of prose.
Yes. It was Leah's first solo exhibition. She just had finished her education, and she contacted me before, I think maybe a year or a year and a half before it was going to be there. So I wrote actually I wrote all of the novel before I saw the exhibition, but I saw, of course, parts of it. And I didn't know Leah, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do anything more than maybe 3 pages for a catalog. But very quickly she began talking about her sculptures as being something that was not quite human, but also maybe alive. And I was very intrigued. And I visited her studio, and I had a very strong reaction to her sculptures. They're all she works with marble, so she has this very long tradition, but they're all very abstract, and they all have their sizes are really weird, because the sculptures are the sizes of small dogs or babies or something, like small animals. And they would just be kind of round figures, and then some of the times she would apply bondage gear or different leather stuff. So they're very sensual and erotic and strange, and I remember really touching them and having this very strong sensory experience that also echoed in the novel. And then I had personally had the idea for a long time that I wanted to write something about work, and I wanted to write something about a group, where the group would be the protagonist and not an individual. So I pitched this idea to Leah, and then she told me that she would try to build the exhibition place like a scenography from I can't remember the name, the Kubrick space movie, something like that, Space Odyssey or something. I can't remember. Anyway, it's called Rumrejsen 2001 in Danish, but I don't know. Anyway, so when I came to see the space, I had written all of it because we printed it in a book that you could read in the exhibition. So the idea was that it was 2 rooms, one room with the 5 books that you had to read with gloves and benches, and then you would pass through a long, strange hallway that she built into a bigger room where all the sculptures were exhibited. So I began writing, and I would email her different texts, and she would begin making sculptures inspired of them, and then she would show me the sculptures and I would write more. So it was like very collaborative and great. And I wrote the novel in like 30 days, which was crazy for me, because I had to, it had to be printed in order to make it to the exhibition. And I actually have one of her sculptures at home that she gave me, one made for me especially. So I was very happy.
Yeah.
That is one called the diamond egg. I think it's in the book. So.
Yeah. Well, just going back to the title and also this notion of time, because it's called Consumed Future Spewed Up as Present. This is the exhibit, and it refers to Kronos, the Greek god of time, who devoured his children and then had to spew them up on Zeus's command. And there's this rendering of this same sense of a devoured future kind of resurfacing as present in the novel, and this kind of simultaneous moving forward and backward in time. And it creates the feeling of longing, which is often evoked. And there's this really palpable relationship between time and this ever-present longing. And I was wondering if you could talk about those two elements.
Well, I think that in the novel there are two kinds of course, there is a narrative, so that's a kind of time, but otherwise it is presented to the employees and maybe also to us as the reader as a timeless space. Like the whole construction of the novel is different employees speaking to the supervisor, I guess. And we don't hear the supervisor talk, but they're addressed by the different employees. And in the beginning of the novel, the employees are very loyal to these different ideas and values that are presented to them by the supervisor or whatever. And one of the ideas that is presented to them is that nothing is ever going to change. We're having a great life on this ship. And what's most important is work. There is nothing outside the work. You live with your colleagues, you eat with your colleagues, there's no free time. And this is a great thing in the beginning of the novel, at least they think. And then, so that's one time, it's like the workplace time, like the office where time never, you just do the same tasks over and over again. And then I think there's another element which is kind of the opposite or maybe the same, that is nostalgia. You called it longing, but I realized some point maybe halfway through that nostalgia was a very important feeling in this book. And it could be positive or negative in connotations, whatever situation, because those of the employees that have memories of being outside of the ship, sounds so weird when you explain it, are like, as the novel progresses, more and more haunted by not only memory but a certain kind of nostalgia. And I was inspired by, I read a lot of testimony from real astronauts. So I think the guy that spent the longest time in space and at some space station, he was asked, what did you miss the most? And he answered, what I miss the most was to be surrounded by water. Like when you shower in a spaceship, it's like this kind small little shower head. But in some way, as I understood it, he was also saying that he missed the atmosphere. Because the atmosphere exists of water, of drops. So this longing, this nostalgia towards water was a very important picture for me when I worked with the novel, like that the employees, at least the human employees, we can talk about the non-human or humanoid employees. Later, they have been taken out of their ecology. And in some way, I think that is also what happens when you work in an office. Even though it's still on the planet, it can be like working in an ecology that simply doesn't fit you.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the, you bring up memory, it's and also nostalgia, but what's interesting in the novel is that both humans and humanoids seem to have this capacity for memory and nostalgia that we normally link as such a human feature, as such a defining feature of humanness. And I think that this ambiguity of the affective and affectionate space that you create that, transcends just organic material, transcends us as living human beings, and kind of is flowing and creating this ambiguity of, what is human and what isn't, which is another really kind of important pulse in the book. How did you kind of, now that I say fluidity, I'm thinking back to water, what you just said, but how did you, is this fluidity or this ambiguity around the question of humanness, is this something that you really wanted to kind of see how ambiguous and how far you could stretch it out, or did it just kind of arise as you were working with the specific statements?
Well, I think I'm always very interested. I came to the same point as you're making, but in a different direction, because what I was interested in was the feeling of being artificial. Okay. Because on a ship you have two categories. You have like common human employees like you and me, and then you'll have humanoid employees, and they are made in a way so they look like a human, they smell, they feel, they have memories. And I guess I was also, of course, interested in this. When I wrote the novel, there was, at least in Scandinavia, probably also around the world, a fear of an artificial intelligence like annihilating the human race. And I thought, and I just had my first child, and I thought that it was an interesting thought that artificial intelligence, they are a product of human creation, so inherent in them is humanity, I guess. So I thought it was interesting to look at something created by man as equal as man, even though he was not there. Because removing the human or the creator from the center of the events was interesting to me, because I wanted to maybe challenge the idea of humanity as being the most wonderful thing. And in the novel you will see that. So I wanted to play with the question about, like, when is something human and when is it not? If we as humans create artificial intelligence and we give it memory and we give it free will, how can we say that it doesn't have humanity in itself, or something like that? I don't have the answer, but I wanted to explore the idea. And also that was also very much an idea that came to me because I often feel very artificial, and I feel like I have artificial emotions, and that they have been taught to me. And of course I have, like, this is, I don't know the word in English, Yelena, Anthropocene. Well, I think that if you challenge the idea of humanity or humanness as being the most central thing in the world, if you take a step away from that, suddenly nature is there, the stars are there, the earth is there, the water is there, and it plays a completely different role. You're no longer the master of the stars, you're just like a particle. And I think that's a very comforting notion, actually.
Anthropocene, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that, this sort of a poetic space that's encountering more of a biotechnical or kind of even a more intellectual or I guess philosophical space. I think that hybrid is really interesting. And even, as everyone has heard you and me read one of the statements, even though they are these employer reports, but when you read them, each one of them could be almost a workplace poem. And I know that, you as a poet and as a novelist, and I don't know if I'm getting it correctly, as a poet first, perhaps, how does your,
first.
Always, how does your poetry kind of craft or affect the way that you approach prose or that you work with prose?
That's an interesting question. I think that poetry is much more interested in a timeless space, maybe, and prose is more interested in like narrative. I didn't think so much about it when I wrote this novel, but it was important to me when it was finished to call it a novel, because I think it has like the underlying structure of a novel. And my poetry is very weird. Like this is nothing. So I was very inspired by Leah's sculptures, and I had like this feeling that I would look at it and I would think, oh, it looks like a newspaper, and then I would write it, and then I would look up and it would look like something else, the same sculpture. So I had a feeling that they were changing forms, like they were shapeshifters.
Okay.
And I think that was very inspiring for poetic language. Or I needed like the poetic language. I also thought that it was very important that the reader would feel sympathy or maybe identify with the humanoid employees, and I needed poetry and senses to do that, because I knew that instantly a human reader would identify with the human, of course, and I wanted maybe to slowly change that idea. So a lot of the testimonials, you don't know who's speaking. Is it a human, or is it like a made human, an android, a humanoid? Because by evoking senses and taste and sound and sensory stuff in the reader, it would connect with a character that's not human, and they would identify with a non-human character. So that was very important to me. That was one of the things that I really wanted.
For me personally, I would say I think I connected the most with the non-human characters, or I mean, sometimes because even the characters themselves almost would forget or would question. Some of them would say, "Is that human? Am I human?" But I think that was one, something that's the most kind of moving and also startling in the book, is that the things that feel the most familiar or the most hard-hitting or hit home are actually expressions that come from these artificial beings or these biotechnical beings that are actually asking questions that maybe humans don't dare ask, or maybe that we would ask if we stepped out of our like central, like we made the earth, everything. Because the humanoids are asking questions in a more kind of a humble way, it seems. They're a small part of the universe. They don't expect to be at the center of the universe. They don't expect to have all this like importance. So I think that is definitely, also resonates more than ever right now, where I feel like communally, in the pandemic and also in all the kind of structural reckoning that's happening across the world, I think that's something that we're all really thinking about, is this notion of like individual importance and communal importance. I was wondering how you think about this, the place of this novel today versus even, I know you wrote it, a couple years ago.
Yes, well, I've been thinking about it too. And well, I think that one of the things that happened with the pandemic, at least in Europe, is that the state became very clear to the citizens. like the power of our prime ministers, and what became very clear, suddenly really realized very clearly that they could make laws, they could send us home from one day to another. And you can react differently to this. You can be happy that there is like a state or a power that is taking responsibility, or you can be maybe a little critical or worried. And but I think that also you're talking about the structural reckoning. I think that the power that the state has over the citizen is just becoming more visible. It has actually, of course, it has always been there, but suddenly the structural racism is more visible. Suddenly the power of the state to surveil is more visible. And when we see what rules we live under suddenly more clearly, it is easier for us to question them. And in this novel is very much a book about a group of people living under a very severe set of rules, and in the beginning of the novel having been indoctrinated to love them, and they're afraid not to be loyal with the workplace. And some of the most terrible things they could imagine is not being loyal to the workplace. And slowly, as the novel progresses, they begin to challenge this idea, and actually there is a kind of rebellion. So I think, of course, that, so yes, I think that the way the state or our employers or those who make the rules, I think it has been more clear to us how it functions. And I also think that it's just very good for everyone to work less. I know that not everyone did work less, but then I think also the notion that you could actually change such big things from one day to another has been eye-opening for a lot of people, because we're so close. We're like,
oh, sorry to cut you
off.
I
could talk for like forever.
No, I just wanted to pick up on this notion of productivity, workplace productivity, and like it really, you know, a lot of the questions that these employees have is trying to question how you define value. Is it something that's rational, or can it be emotional? Is it something that's, you know, objective or communal, or can it be personal? And I think it kind of ties back to this, you know, like this, when you have, you know, sheer productivity, it's just like value is clearly defined and there's nothing outside of it. But when you start to have kind of a more emotive sense of value, I think that's where you start to question, you know, how could you even measure if it's productive or not, or how do you even measure the value of these things?
Yes, that's true. I think that the novel is, I've always been very interested by these like pair of opposites that is in our culture, like human, animal, man, woman, stuff like that. And how I've always been very interested in like the threshold between the two. And that's also why the book has these two very distinct categories, like human and humanoid. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there is no categories. It's just something they've been told. But yes, so I wanted to like show that just a tiny bit of doubt will make all these pair of opposites tumble down. And something that we haven't really talked about, that is like the third party on the ship, are these objects, because you have a ship with humans and humanoids, and they touch down on a new planet called New Discovery, like shout out to the colonists. And from this planet, they bring these strange objects that they can't figure out, are they living or are they non-living? Are they like mineral or egg, or they're of course inspired by Leo sculptures. And it's actually the arrival of these objects that sparks the change in the employees, because they encounter something that isn't you can't put it into the upper pair of opposites. It is not human and it's not humanoid. It's something in between. and that is just so wonderful to the humanoid crew, but the human part of the crew are very freaked out because they have been taught that being human is better. So there's a hierarchy, like human is best and humanoid is lesser, and letting go of this pair of opposites would mean letting go of status. So yeah, that's not easy for them, and they end up, the human crew is really the losers in this book. I'm like you, I root for the humanoids. Like,
but also in terms of these objects, they bring, like, a lot of them bring about this kind of very sensual, you know, almost erotic space, erotic, not, you know, in that sense of like the high, you know, the senses fully engaged. And I think it's like this erotic space is a completely new element that maybe, you know, when you think about workplace, that is like the most sterile, non-erotic space that you can create. And so what defines, you know, how does a workplace become more personal when there's some sort of erotic space, meaning that people can have desires that are not productive or not utilitarian? And I think that's disturbance is really interesting through the objects, like that they're, and the way that they're discovering, like, why do I have this desire that has no utilitarian purpose? Like, where does it come from, and what does that mean? You know,
that's true. I'm very interested in this book, especially interested in taking the sensual and erotic and taking it out of like the romantic love. I mean, it can be there, of course, that's fine, but it's, I think that we have erotic sensual relationships to a lot of other stuff. I mean, also stuff that's not human, and not in a way that it's kink, but just it isn't in a way that we have learned to suppress sort of sensual experiences. I mean, it's very sensual to feel the wind on your face. So I'm not as so of course it will sometimes read as erotic, but I also just am really into encountering material. I know that sounds maybe, but that's actually what I mean. I like when there has been a lockdown, I've spent most of my time dyeing fabric with like herbs and plants. And for me, it could easily have been like a theme in the employees, because it's such an intimate relationship to fabric.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are also living fabrics in this book, I think, maybe 2 or 3 places. Like, I don't know what Martin translated it to.
I think, there's an ambiguity, because whether it's a human perceiving something as living or a humanoid perceiving something as living, but there is definitely a sense that everything is kind of like moving, like anything can come to life or is, you know, living, or anything that is living can also like kind of stop, you know, when they're talking about their programs and where they need to be upgraded or renewed, or I do want to just open up the space. I know that we have some questions. I'll see with Rosie maybe if there's any questions.
Hi, Rosie.
Okay.
Just had one. Okay. So Brendan has said the 2 main threads tonight have been the influence of visual media, such as Leah Hesland's sculpture and film, and the thematic elements, such as memory and nostalgia, the fluidity of time and the nature of humanity. And you mentioned Kubrick's 2001: Space Odyssey. I wonder if Andrei Tarkovsky's work has played any part in the novel's conception or execution. Sorry, I've butchered his name.
No. Yeah, I think you're talking about Solaris.
Yes.
Maybe. Yes. It's a great. He made a lot of great movies, and really weird, great science fiction movie where I think maybe a planet with just ocean is like the antagonist. But yes, I was very, very inspired by like sci-fi tropes, and I watched all the old movies again, and I loved, and also Blade Runner, and just I was interested to see how is like non-human alien or cyborg or replicant, how are they, what do we know, what would the reader expect from them? I think I wasn't more inspired by Solaris or Tchaikovsky than about a lot of other stuff. But maybe living in Denmark and almost having a border to Russia, or at least some sea borders. Of course, he's Russian, right?
Yeah.
Of course, maybe that tradition is just, closer or something like that. Of course, yes. I remember seeing a documentary about him that talked about when you would have like wide shots in American movies, you would always see a lot of sky and the ground would be, and two figures would be in the bottom. And Tchaikovsky, he works with like a very, very small line of sky and then ground.
Yeah.
And I definitely was interested in like that shot and where it places the figure in the movie.
Yeah.
Wonderful nerdy question.
Someone has also said that they read your newest book and loved it. I haven't, but and they're asking when it will be translated.
I don't know. The rights haven't been acquired. I know that it's coming in Norwegian and Swedish in like maybe next a year or 18 months. But let me know if you want to buy the rights.
Yeah.
Oh, there was something I was wondering when you said about the office being a kind of alienating kind of space that doesn't have the same atmosphere as we're meant to have in a way. And do you think it's changed? Have you been working at home more, or?
Yeah, well, I had a part-time job in an office, and when I finished this book and turned it into my publisher, I quit my job. So yes, it was, and it was very interlinked, and that was actually something that really was a starting point for me, was the language of efficiency that we had to talk at the workplace. Like, you probably have them in Denmark. They're called mus-samtaler. Each year you will have a conversation with your boss about your efficiency and how you're supposed to develop. I think it's like employee development conversation.
Yeah.
What is it called?
Just like a yearly review or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those were just like the most horror thing I had ever encountered. I thought that this is just like what horror movies and sci-fi movies are made of. It's so alienating, and I just, as a writer, was so interested in like the emptiness of that language and the power play in that language. So that was one of my first elements. And I saw, like, when I wrote this novel, NASA had picked out new astronauts. I think it's maybe every 4 or 5 years they find new people to go to space. And of course, it's like a very tough competition. And people have been working for this like since they were children. And on their Instagram, I recommend NASA's Instagram very much. They had like these little videos of the new, like they revealed the new how do you say it? Astronauts.
Yeah.
And each astronaut made a very, very short introduction of themselves, like, hi, I'm Leslie and I'm from Boston and I'm a bioengineer and I'm just so happy to be here. And that was, my mind was just blown. I think I saw those videos when I was in Leah's studio. So that was kind of the starting point. Like, yes, it's like the feeling that you need to be loyal to your workplace, more loyal than, I mean, everyone with small children knows this, that the workplace have expectation of you to be more loyal with the workplace than with your own family. And even if you don't have children, you know this, it just becomes very obvious when there's someone that, you know,
Really
can't feed themselves without you. So yeah, and we have actually designed our whole society around 9 to 5. And I think that's kind of scary.
Yes. So we've had some more questions come in. One from Karen saying she wonders if the new planet they visit might allude to Leah's studio, and the status of the artist's sculpture as an animate/inanimate object waiting to be activated by an audience.
That's so interesting. I haven't really thought about that before. I think I thought about the planet, the new discovery, as a humanoid Earth. Like it's a copy of Earth. It looks like Earth, and and maybe it is Earth. I don't really know. But yeah, that's really interesting. Maybe that's true. Like it is definitely some kind of utopia. I don't want to spoil the book, but yeah, it becomes obvious in the end.
Okay. We've also had one from Tina to say that she liked your thoughts on lockdown and how it's we still have. And how can you say how how does your reading change our experience of time, and maybe how does this relate to your earlier distinction between poetry and narrative? Would reading poetry perhaps be more like dyeing fabric than reading narrative fiction?
Okay. I didn't really understand the first part of the question.
No, sorry.
Like the reading of the book. But maybe I can just answer the second part. Well, some days I'm very into that I have that poetry and prose are very different. And other days I think that they're not at all. But of course there are different traditions. I'm sorry, I think my headphones are running out of battery.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can still hear
you. I think my new book is like a mix of genres, so it has poetry and novel and prose and diary and journal and medical papers and stuff. So I guess that's the answer. I think that maybe poetry is more in the business of re-enchanting the world, and poetry maybe traditionally is closer to addressing non-human parts of the world, while prose is traditionally more interested in like relational human drama, which is great. I love that too. But I guess that it's true that dyeing fabric has given me some experiences that reminded me of writing poetry. For example, I'm much less afraid of the dark. It's very interesting because I will, sometimes late at night, I will hang out the dyed fabric to dry outside and it'll be very dark. And I've done this now so many times that I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. I just I walk it like into water, and that's, I've never been like crazy afraid of the dark, but you know, you can feel uncomfortable, but it's suddenly,
I'm also not afraid of insects. I can't get this creepy feeling when I'm in the woods anymore. So I guess it's been very, I recommend it, I must say.
That's good. Does Yelena have anything else? Any questions, or should we?
Well, I would love to continue to ask you questions for hours and hours, Olga, but I think we do need to round up this conversation. Unfortunately, it's been such a pleasure to be able to chat with you about the novel. And thank you so much to Lolli for bringing this into the world, this human cyborg living, non-living thing that I have absolutely loved. And for everyone that's here, if you haven't read it, please get a copy in Danish or in English. Do you have any last words, Rosie?
No, it's available still to buy on our website. And I think we've got a special code going at the moment, so look into that. And yeah, I think that's everything. I just want to say thank you to both of you for talking about the book, and it was great to hear your insights, Olga. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me virtually.
Very welcome. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm